One CEO found a letter from a single pregnant mother who had been laid off and was completely shocked. A story of overcoming and love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on where you are watching from. The office on the 45th floor of the commercial building on Wall Street still held the distinctive scent of the imported cologne his father used, a blend of bergamot and cedar that Michael Johnson would never forget. 3 weeks had passed since the sudden heart attack that took Robert Johnson, and the 32-year-old still felt a lump in his throat every time he had to enter that environment that had been the absolute kingdom of the patriarch of Johnson & Sons construction for decades. Michael ran his hand through his brown hair, slightly tousled by the wind coming through the slightly open window. His green eyes, a maternal inheritance that contrasted with the pragmatic personality inherited from his paternal side, scanned the room with a mix of reverence and apprehension. The mahogany walls displayed diplomas, certifications, and photos of iconic projects that the construction company had erected throughout New York. The weight of responsibility seemed materialized in every object, every document, every memory preserved there. "Mr. Michael, do you need anything?" The soft voice of Mrs. Smith, the family secretary for over 20 years, interrupted his melancholic thoughts. "No, Mrs. Smith, thank you. I'm just organizing some things." Michael forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The grey-haired woman with gold-rimmed glasses watched him with the maternal concern she had always shown for him. "I know it's hard, my son. Your father was a strong-willed man, but he had his heart in the right place." Mrs. Smith hesitated for a moment before continuing. "If you need anything, I'll be at my desk. Oh, and don't forget about the board meeting at 3 this afternoon." Michael nodded, turning his attention back to the heavy, solid wood desk. Drawers filled with contracts, correspondence, and various documents awaited his attention. He started with the top right drawer, where he found mainly administrative papers and some Mont Blanc pens that his father had collected. The second drawer revealed old family photographs and some newspaper clippings about the company's projects. It was in the third drawer, partially stuck due to the characteristic humidity of New York winters, that Michael found a worn brown folder. Inside, among old receipts and scattered notes, his fingers touched something different. A piece of paper with a more delicate texture, folded with almost reverent care. The letter was handwritten in impeccable feminine script, revealing education and care. The navy ink had slightly faded, but the words remained legible, filled with an emotion that leaped from the paper. "Dear Mr. Robert Johnson, I write this letter with a heavy heart and trembling hands, knowing that I may not have the right to trouble you with my personal problems. My name is Sarah Thompson, and I worked as an architect in the residential projects department for the past 3 years. Today, I received notice of my termination from the company, and although I understand that restructuring is part of the corporate world, I am writing this letter to make a plea born from the desperation of a future mother. I recently discovered that I am 3 months pregnant. I know this information may seem irrelevant to business matters, but you need to know that this job is not just my source of income. It is my only hope of providing dignity and a future for the child I carry. I do not ask for pity, Mr. Johnson. I ask for an opportunity to prove that I can continue contributing to the growth of the company, even while facing the challenges of motherhood. I have ongoing projects that I know better than any other professional, and I believe that my dedication to sustainable details can add value to the company's ventures. If it is not possible to keep me on staff, I accept any form of work, part-time, remote, specific projects. I just need a chance to show that I am not a burden, but rather an investment in the company's future. I lost my father when I was 15, and my mother worked tirelessly to provide me with an education. I graduated with a full scholarship from Columbia University and have always dreamed of building not just buildings, but homes where families could grow with dignity. Ironically, I now struggle to ensure that my own family has that chance. Attached to this letter are some of my most recent projects, including energy optimization proposals that could reduce operational costs of the developments by up to 30%. This is not a bribe, Mr. Johnson. It is a practical demonstration that I am not asking for a favor, but offering value. I await your response with the hope of someone who believes in the human kindness that still exists in the business world. Sincerely, Sarah Thompson, Architect. AIA 02345667. Michael read the letter 3 times in a row, feeling a growing tightness in his chest with each word. The date in the upper right corner indicated that it had been written just over 8 months ago, a time when he was still involved with projects in the Washington, D.C. branch and was not closely following the human resources decisions of the New York headquarters. His hands trembled slightly as he searched for any response, any note from his father indicating that action had been taken. He rummaged through the entire folder, all the drawers, but found no evidence that the letter had even been read by Robert Johnson. The sound of rain beginning to patter against the office windows created a melancholic soundtrack for his reflections. Michael stood up and walked to the window, observing the frantic movement of people on the street 45 floors below, each carrying their own burdens and hopes. "What kind of man were you, father?" he murmured to the fogged glass, his voice heavy with the disappointment he never imagined he would feel towards the man he had always admired. The memory of his grandmother Hope, who raised him after the early death of his mother, echoed in his mind. "Michael, my grandson, always remember that true success is not measured by the size of the buildings we construct, but by the size of the heart we put into each brick." He returned to the desk with determined steps and opened the laptop. A quick search in the human resources system revealed that Sarah Thompson had worked at the company from January 2019 to March 2023. Her performance evaluation was consistently excellent, with particular praise for her creativity in sustainable solutions and attention to technical details. The termination report, signed by Robert Johnson, the department supervisor, cited only departmental restructuring as the reason. There was no mention of disciplinary issues, poor performance, or any justification that explained why an exemplary employee had been let go. Michael closed his eyes and massaged his temples, feeling the onset of a headache. The discovery of the letter was stirring up convictions he thought were solid about his father's character and the values that guided the family business. He opened a new tab in the browser and typed in Sarah's full name. Her LinkedIn profile appeared at the top of the results. Sarah Thompson, sustainable architect, specialist in eco-friendly residential projects. The photo showed a woman in her 30s with wavy brown hair tied back in a relaxed ponytail, brown eyes radiating determination, and a subtle smile suggesting inner strength. The professional description mentioned her experience in sustainable construction and her current work as a freelancer in a small office in Brooklyn. A recent post displayed photos of a sustainable house project, accompanied by the caption, "Every project is an opportunity to build a better world for the next generation. Hearts, sustainable architecture, better future." Michael couldn't help but notice the hashtag about a better future and wondered if there was any connection to the child mentioned in the letter. The growing feeling of injustice in his chest mixed with something he couldn't quite name, perhaps curiosity, perhaps admiration for the transparent strength of that woman who had faced such a difficult situation with dignity. The intercom's bell brought him back to the present. "Mr. Michael," Carmen's voice sounded concerned. "Mr. Robert Johnson is here and says he urgently needs to speak with you." Michael furrowed his brow, Robert was the supervisor who had signed Sarah's termination. "Ask him to come in, Carmen." Robert Johnson entered the office with hesitant steps, his 50s evident in the expression lines and the grey strands beginning to dominate his brown hair. His nervous hands clutched a folder of documents against his chest. Mr. Santos, thank you for seeing me." His voice trembled slightly. "I know this is a difficult time for you, but I need to talk about some irregularities I've discovered in the department." "Irregularities?" Michael gestured for Robert to sit in the armchair across from the desk. "What kind of irregularities?" Robert looked around nervously before responding. "It involves some terminations that were, let's say, poorly justified, and some projects that were approved without following all the environmental protocols." He hesitated before continuing. "Your father, well, he was pushing hard for quick results, and sometimes—" "Robert," Michael interrupted him, his voice taking on a firmer tone. "I need you to be specific. Which terminations are you talking about?" "Well, there was that architect, Sarah something. She had been questioning some projects that didn't adhere strictly to sustainable standards. She started to annoy some important clients who wanted to cut costs on eco-friendly materials." Robert cleared his throat nervously. "Your father asked me to find a justification to let her go. He said she was hindering important business." Michael felt the blood rush to his face, but kept his expression controlled. Sarah's letter was right there, just inches from his right hand, a silent piece of evidence of the injustice that had been committed. "And did you find that justification?" The question came out sharper than Michael intended. "I used departmental restructuring as the official reason. There was nothing wrong with her work. In fact, she was one of our best professionals." Robert lowered his eyes. "But your father was very clear about wanting her out of the company." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain, which was now falling more heavily. Michael looked out the window, watching the city lights begin to flicker on in the late March afternoon. His mind raced, processing the implications of what he had just heard. "Robert, I need all the documents related to these irregularities, and I want a complete list of all employees who were let go for restructuring in the last 2 years." "Yes, sir. I brought some documents." Robert opened his folder with trembling hands. "Michael, your father wasn't a bad man. He was just under a lot of pressure from shareholders to keep the company competitive." Michael nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. Sarah's letter had opened a door to questions he didn't know if he was ready to face. The company he had always known as a pillar of integrity was revealing cracks that threatened his entire perception of the family legacy. "Leave the documents here, and you can go, Robert. We'll talk more about this tomorrow." Alone again, Michael picked up Sarah's letter and read it for the 4th time. The words seemed to carry even more weight after the conversation with Robert. "I await your response with the hope of someone who believes in the human kindness that still exists in the business world." The response had never come. Hope had been ignored, and somewhere in the city, a woman had faced the challenges of motherhood alone after, having her professional dignity trampled by decisions based on corporate convenience. Michael closed the laptop with determination. He couldn't undo what his father had done, but perhaps there was still time for some form of reparation. Sarah's letter was not just a forgotten plea for help. It was a mirror reflecting exactly the Michael Johnson had no intention of becoming the kind of man and leader he didn't want to be. He carefully stored the letter in the top drawer of his desk and grabbed his coat. The rain had stopped, but the afternoon air still carried the characteristic humidity of autumn in New York. While waiting for the elevator, Michael wasn't exactly sure what his next step would be, but one thing was clear. The discovery of that letter had changed something fundamental within him. The elevator door closed with a soft chime, and Michael descended toward the parking garage with the feeling that his business life, and perhaps his personal life, was about to take a completely new direction. The Café du Centre in the West Village buzzed with the typical energy of a Thursday morning. Michael parked his black BMW on Harmony Street and watched the hustle and bustle through the windshield for a few minutes. He had spent the previous night researching everything about Sarah Thompson and discovered that she often worked at that cafe, according to her professional Instagram, which showcased photos of architectural sketches on napkins next to cups of cappuccino. 3 days had passed since the discovery of the letter, and Michael had devised a careful plan to approach Sarah without immediately revealing his identity. He wore a light blue dress shirt without a tie and a casual blazer, an attempt to appear less corporate and more approachable than he usually was at construction meetings. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries enveloped him as soon as he pushed open the glass door of the establishment. The atmosphere combined modern rusticity with New York coziness, exposed brick walls, hanging plants, rustic wooden tables, and a soft soundtrack of indie music that created the perfect environment for intimate conversations or creative work. Michael ordered a double espresso at the counter and chose a strategic table near the corner where, according to his observations on social media, Sarah usually sat. He didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:15 a.m., she entered the cafe, pushing a stroller with one hand and balancing a brown leather portfolio with the other. Seeing Sarah in person was like receiving a punch in the stomach. The LinkedIn photo didn't do justice to the striking presence she radiated. Her wavy brown hair fell naturally over her shoulders, framing a face with delicate yet determined features. She wore a beige linen blouse, dark jeans, and comfortable flats, a look that combined effortless elegance with maternal practicality. But it was her eyes that impressed him the most. Brown, as he had seen in the photo, but filled with an intensity and intelligence that seemed to capture every detail of the environment. There was also something more, a subtle vigilance, as if she were constantly assessing situations and people, likely developed from the need to protect herself and her daughter. The baby in the stroller was a miniature version of her mother. Curly brown hair, rosy cheeks, and large eyes that observed everything with the typical curiosity of a 6-month-old. She was dressed in a light yellow onesie and sucking on a colorful silicone toy. "Could I please have a cappuccino without sugar and a fresh orange juice?" Sarah addressed the barista with a tired but kind smile. "And do you have any baby food or crackers? Sophia is starting to get fussy." Michael discreetly observed how she expertly handled the situation of being a single mother in a public space. Every movement was calculated for efficiency. She positioned the stroller so she could see her daughter while working, chose a table near an outlet to charge her laptop, and quickly organized a small area with toys to keep Sophia entertained. Taking a deep breath, he approached her. "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Are you the architect Sarah Thompson?" Sarah looked up from the laptop she had just opened, her expression immediately becoming more cautious. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Michael." He deliberately omitted the last name Johnson. "I'm a businessman looking for an architect for a special residential project. I saw some of your work online and was impressed by your sustainable approach." The suspicion in Sarah's eyes slightly diminished, replaced by professional interest. "What kind of project?" "It's a renovation of an apartment in the Upper East Side. It belonged to my grandmother, who recently passed away." Michael felt a real pang of pain mentioning his grandmother Hope. "I want to preserve the emotional essence of the place while modernizing it sustainably. Your posts about architecture that respects family memories caught my attention." Sarah gestured to the empty chair in front of her. "You can sit down. This is my daughter, Sophia. She accompanies me to work meetings." Her voice carried a defensive tone, as if she expected the presence of the child to be a problem. "Hi, Sophia." Michael addressed the baby naturally, who was watching him with curiosity. "What beautiful eyes you have," Sophia responded with a toothless smile that melted any tension in the air. "She's very sociable," Sarah commented with evident maternal pride. "Sometimes I think she would make a great salesperson in the future." Michael genuinely laughed. "Or an architect like her mom. I'm sure she's already observing the angles and proportions of this cafe." The observation made Sarah smile for the first time, completely transforming her expression. The smile lit up her face and brought a lightness that Michael realized was rare in her daily routine. "So, tell me about this apartment," she said, opening a notepad. "What kind of memories do you want to preserve?" Michael felt more relaxed. "My grandmother was an incredible woman, a professional pianist, very connected to the arts and nature. The apartment has a grand piano that cannot be removed, many plants she personally cultivated, and an extensive library." He paused, realizing he was talking about real and genuine memories. "She always said that a home should nourish the soul, not just shelter the body." Sarah stopped writing and looked directly into his eyes. "It's beautiful, and rare to find someone who understands that architecture is about emotions, not just functionality." "Exactly!" Michael leaned slightly forward, his genuine passion for the subject shining through. "I want anyone who steps in to feel the positive energy that my grandmother cultivated for decades, but with modern comfort and sustainability." Sarah began to fidget, emitting small sounds of dissatisfaction. She immediately turned to her daughter, checking if she needed a diaper change or was just bored. "I'm sorry, she's in the phase of exploring the world, and staying still for too long irritates her," Sarah explained as she pulled out a new toy from her bag. "No need to apologize. In fact, it's impressive to see how you manage to be both a professional and a mother at the same time. It must require extraordinary organization." The words came out with genuine sincerity, but Michael noticed a flash of pain in Sarah's eyes. "It's not always easy," she admitted, "but Sophia is my motivation to be better at everything I do." "May I ask, do you work alone or do you have a team?" "I have a partner, Carla. She handles more of the administrative side while I focus on the creative projects. It's an arrangement that works well, especially now that I need flexibility with Sophia." Sarah hesitated before continuing. "We're a small office, but our work is of high quality. Sometimes big companies don't value that." Michael caught the subtle bitterness in her last sentence and wondered if she was referring to her experience at Santos and Sons. "I believe that quality always outweighs quantity. I prefer to work with professionals who are passionate about what they do." Sarah studied him for a moment, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. "And what kind of budget are we considering for this project?" Michael had thought about this question the night before. He needed to offer an attractive value, but not so high that it seemed suspicious. "I'm thinking of something between $15,000 to $25,000, depending on the scope. It's an emotional investment for me, so quality is more important than savings." Sarah's eyes lit up. It was clearly a significant budget for her small office. That would be wonderful. When would you like to see the apartment?" "How about Saturday afternoon? I can pick you both up if that's convenient. The apartment is on United States Avenue near Central Park." "No need to pick us up," Sarah replied quickly. "I can take an Uber with Sophia. What time would be good?" Michael noted her almost defensive independence and respected the boundary. 3 p.m. would be perfect. I'll send the exact address via WhatsApp if you could give me your number. As they exchanged contact information, Sophia dropped her toy and began to whimper. Michael instinctively bent down to pick it up, wiping it with a napkin before handing it back to the baby. "Thank you," Sarah said. looking surprised by the naturalness of the gesture. Most men feel uncomfortable around babies. I've always liked children. They're honest and spontaneous without hidden agendas. Michael smiled at Sophia, who had returned to playing happily. My grandmother always said that children see the truth in people better than adults do. Sarah studied Michael with renewed interest. Your grandmother seems to have been a wise woman. She was, and I'm sure she would have loved to meet you both. The statement came out more sincerely than Michael intended, but he realized it was true. They talked for another 20 minutes about architectural concepts, sustainability, and the philosophy behind residential design. Michael was genuinely impressed by Sarah's depth of knowledge about eco-friendly construction and her ability to explain complex concepts in an accessible way. I need to go, Sarah finally said, checking her watch. I have a meeting with another client in an hour, and I need to stop by home to leave Sophia with my neighbor. Of course, I don't want to disrupt your schedule. Michael stood up with her, helping her organize the stroller while Sarah packed away her laptop. I'm looking forward to showing the apartment on Saturday. Me too, Sarah replied, and Michael noticed that she was genuinely excited about the project. It will be special to work in a place with so much emotional history. As he watched Sarah leave the cafe, Michael felt a strange mix of admiration and guilt. The woman he had just met radiated strength, intelligence, and a genuine passion for her profession. Knowing that she had been unjustly fired from her company for questioning unethical practices made his stomach churn. At the same time, he couldn't deny that he was drawn to much more than her professional competence. The way Sarah balanced motherhood and career, how her eyes lit up when she spoke about sustainable architecture, how she treated her daughter with infinite care yet remained focused on her work. All of this created a magnetism that Michael hadn't expected to feel. Returning to his car, he reflected on the complexity of the situation he had created. He was genuinely interested in hiring Sarah to renovate his grandmother's apartment, but his motivations went far beyond the professional. There was something about her that sparked his curiosity in an almost obsessive way. Perhaps the quiet strength that shone through in every gesture, perhaps the way she had turned adversity into determination. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Mrs. Smith from the construction company. Michael, the board is asking about tomorrow's meeting. Can they confirm your attendance? I confirm, Mrs. Smith. And can you schedule a private meeting with Robert Johnson for Monday? I have some HR policy questions to discuss. Of course, my son. Is everything okay? You seem different these days. Michael smiled sadly. I'm just learning some truths about the company, Mrs. Smith. Nothing that can't be resolved. He hung up the phone and started the car, but stayed parked for a few more minutes, watching the street's activity. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. There was something about Sarah Thompson that had awakened in him not just guilt about the past, but a genuine curiosity about the future. Both of the company and personally. Discovering the letter had been just the beginning. Now Michael knew he wasn't just trying to repair injustice of the past, but perhaps discovering something about himself that he didn't know he was looking for. Saturday dawned with the characteristic blue sky of autumn in New York, that kind of perfect afternoon that made the gardens breathe and people walk more slowly through the tree-lined streets of the Upper East Side. Michael arrived at the apartment on United States Avenue an hour before the scheduled time, needing time to process the emotions that always overwhelmed him in that place. The building from 1952 maintained the discreet elegance of architectural designs from that era. An Art Deco facade, a lobby with high ceilings decorated with Czech crystal chandeliers, and elevators with pantographic doors that still operated with their original smoothness. Michael greeted Mr. Jenkins, the doorman he had known since childhood, and ascended to the 8th floor. The key turned in the lock with the same metallic sound he had known for decades. The 1937 square feet apartment stretched out before him like a museum of affectionate memories. The entrance led to a spacious living room where the black Steinway grand piano occupied a prominent position near the windows that overlooked the treetops outside. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with books from floor to ceiling, interspersed with paintings of landscapes by local artists that his grandmother had collected throughout her life. Michael walked slowly through the room, his fingers lightly touching the piano keys. The sound echoed softly in the space, bringing back memories of afternoons when Grandmother Hope taught him to play Chopin while telling stories about the importance of finding beauty even in life's difficult moments. "People build houses, Michael," she used to say as her fingers danced across the keys, "but it's the memories that turn houses into homes." The apartment still held the subtle scent of jasmine that his grandmother wore, mixed with the smell of polished wood and old books. It was an aroma that Michael instantly associated with safety, unconditional love, and gentle wisdom. The decor reflected the eclectic personality of Hope Johnson. Antique furniture harmoniously coexisted with contemporary pieces she had collected during her travels. Tropical plants occupied every available corner, hanging ferns, colorful begonias, an imposing monstera reaching almost to the ceiling, and various species of orchids strategically placed near the windows. The intercom rang precisely at 3 p.m., interrupting his melancholic reflections. Michael answered and went downstairs to greet Sarah and Sophie in the lobby. When the elevator doors opened, he felt that visual impact he had experienced at the cafe. Sarah wore a navy blue midi dress that accentuated her brown eyes, her hair styled in a low bun with a few loose strands framing her face. Sophie was in a more compact stroller, dressed in a pink and white striped dress that made her look like a little doll. "Good afternoon," Sarah said with a professional smile, but Michael noticed she was slightly nervous. "Thank you for having us over this weekend." "Of course, I appreciate you coming. Hi, Princess Sophie." He addressed the baby, who immediately reached her little arms toward him. "She's getting more sociable every day," Sarah commented, seeming to relax upon seeing the natural interaction between Michael and her daughter. "I think she's in the phase of wanting to conquer the world." They ascended to the 8th floor in a comfortable silence, broken only by Sophie's curious babbling as she observed everything like an explorer. Michael opened the door and invited the two to enter. Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. She stopped at the entrance of the living room, her eyes scanning every detail of the space with the professional attention of someone who sees possibilities beyond what is visible. "Oh my God," she murmured, slowly approaching the piano. "This place it's magical." Michael watched Sarah explore the apartment with almost religious reverence. She delicately touched the furniture, examined the plants with evident botanical knowledge, and studied the layout of the rooms as if reading a story written in the architecture. "Your grandmother had exceptional taste," Sarah said, stopping in front of a shelf filled with books on music, literature, and philosophy. "And these plants, she really knew how to create a natural microclimate indoors. She used to say that plants were the lungs of the house, purifying not just the air, but also the energy of the environment." Sarah turned to Michael with eyes shining with enthusiasm. She was right. Studies show that certain plants really improve air quality and have a therapeutic effect on people's moods. She pointed to the monstera. "This one, for example, is excellent for naturally humidifying the environment." Sophie began to get restless in her stroller, so Michael suggested, "How about taking her out of the stroller? The apartment is safe for her to explore a bit." Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure? She's in the phase of wanting to grab everything." "Of course, My grandmother would love to see a child exploring this place again. Sarah released Sophie from the stroller, and the baby immediately crawled toward a colorful Persian rug in the center of the living room. Michael and Sarah sat on the floor near her, creating an intimate and relaxed atmosphere. "Tell me about your vision for the renovation," Sarah said, taking a notebook out of her bag while watching Sophie play with the rug's fringes. Michael looked around, organizing thoughts that mixed personal memories with practical needs. "I want to modernize the kitchen and bathrooms while keeping the essence of the place. Install efficient air conditioning, improve the lighting, maybe create an office in what is currently the guest room. And sustainability. It's essential. My grandmother was an environmentalist before it was trendy. I want the changes to reflect those values." Sarah took some quick notes. "We can install solar panels on the building's roof if the management allows, rainwater recycling system, recycled material flooring, eco-friendly paints." She paused and looked directly at Michael. "But I need to ask, this project is really about sustainability, or are you just trying to impress someone?" The question caught Michael off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I've worked with clients who wanted to appear environmentally conscious without actually caring about the impact, and something tells me you're not that kind of person." Michael felt a twinge of guilt, knowing that his motivations were more complex than he admitted. "My grandmother taught me that. Every action has consequences for future generations. Looking at Sophie over there, for example, I want the world we leave for her to be better than the one we found." Sarah watched Sophie trying to pull herself up using the couch, a look of maternal tenderness crossing her face. "That's exactly why I chose to specialize in sustainable architecture. Every project is an opportunity to build a better future for our children." "Our children," Michael repeated softly, and something in the way he said the words made Sarah look at him with renewed curiosity. "Do you have children?" she asked. "Not yet, but I hope to one day. And when that happens, I want to make sure I contribute to leaving the world a little better." Sophie managed to stand up and took a few wobbly steps toward the piano, her little hands reaching out to touch the keys. Sarah quickly got up to support her. "Let her play," Michael said gently. "The piano was made for that." Sophie pressed a few keys randomly, creating discordant sounds that echoed through the room. Instead of noise, Michael heard music, the sound of life renewing a space that had been silent for months. "She has good taste in music," Michael joked, and Sarah laughed genuinely and relaxed. "She inherited my stubbornness, but we're still figuring out where the rest comes from." Michael noticed the absence of any mention of the child's father and decided not to press the issue. Instead, he stood up and played a simple melody on the piano, a lullaby that his grandmother used to play. Sophie stopped making noise and looked fascinated at Michael's hands moving over the keys. Sarah approached, sitting next to him on the piano bench. "My grandmother taught me this music," Michael explained softly. "She said music was the universal language of love." "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured, and Michael noticed she had tears in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Sarah discreetly wiped her eyes. "Sorry, it's just... I haven't seen Sophie react to music like this in a long time. Her father, well, he wasn't very interested in these things." Michael stopped playing and turned to face her. "He's no longer in your lives?" "No. When he found out I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready to be a father, and that it would be better for us to go our separate ways." Sarah spoke, in a controlled voice, but Michael sensed the pain still present. "It was over a year ago, and since then it's just been the two of us." "I'm sorry. That must have been very difficult." "It was. It still is sometimes, but it also made me stronger, and more selective about who I allow into our lives." Michael understood the underlying message in her statement. Sarah was making it clear that she was cautious with men, especially those who could threaten the stability she had built for herself and her daughter. "I completely understand," Michael said. "Trust is something that is earned through actions, not words." They spent the next hour going through the apartment room by room. Sarah took precise measurements, photographed specific angles, and made detailed notes about renovation possibilities. Michael watched her work, meticulous, creative, and always considering practical aspects alongside the aesthetic ones. In the kitchen, she opened cabinets and tested faucets with professional familiarity. "This kitchen has great bones," she commented. "It just needs an upgrade in appliances and a reorganization of the layout for better workflow." "My grandmother cooked a lot. She used to say the kitchen was the heart of the home." She was. Right again. It's where we nourish our bodies and our relationships. Sarah measured the distance between the stove and the sink. "We could create a central island here, with sustainable materials, reclaimed wood, natural stone, recycled metals." In the master bedroom, Sarah studied the incidence of natural light and airflow. "This room has a very serene energy," she observed. "Your grandmother must have slept very well here." She said she woke up every day grateful for another opportunity to make a difference in the world. Sarah stopped measuring and looked at Michael. "She really impacted you deeply, didn't she?" "She was the wisest and kindest person I've ever known. She raised me after my mother passed away when I was 8. She taught me that true success is not measured in money, but in the positive impact we have on the lives of others." "What a valuable lesson," Sarah said softly, "and what a responsibility too." "Exactly. Sometimes I feel like I'm not properly honoring the values she taught me." Sarah studied him with curiosity. "Why do you say that?" Michael hesitated, struggling with the urge to share about the discovery of the letter and the injustices committed by his company, but he knew it was too early for such deep revelations. "Let's just say I'm going through a re-evaluation of my professional priorities," he finally said. When they finished the tour of the apartment, Sophie was visibly tired. Sarah placed her back in the stroller, where the baby immediately closed her eyes. "She loved the apartment," Sarah said, with maternal affection. "I think she felt the positive energy of the place." "And you? What did you think of the project?" Sarah looked around the room one last time, her eyes shining with creative enthusiasm. "It's a dream project. It's not just a renovation, it's an opportunity to preserve a love story and transform it into something that can continue inspiring future generations." "So do you accept the project?" "With one condition," Sarah said, taking on a more serious tone. "I want total creative freedom to propose innovative solutions and complete transparency about budget and timeline. I've worked with clients who constantly change their minds, and it's detrimental to everyone." Michael extended his hand to seal the agreement. "Total transparency. My word." The handshake lasted a few seconds longer than strictly necessary, and Michael felt a subtle electricity in the contact. Sarah also seemed to notice, withdrawing her hand with a slight blush on her cheeks. "I'll prepare a complete proposal by Wednesday," she said, returning to a professional tone, "including a detailed timeline, specifications for sustainable materials, and budget options." "Perfect. And Sarah?" "Yes? Thank you for bringing life back to this place today. My grandmother would have loved to meet both of you." Sarah smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. "I'm sure she's still around in some way, looking after the people she loves." Michael accompanied them to the ground floor and helped them into the lift that Sarah had called. As the car pulled away, he waved to Sophie, who was watching him from the back window with her curious eyes. Back in the apartment, Michael sat on the piano bench and played the lullaby again. The sound echoed through the empty apartment, but he didn't feel alone. The presence of Sarah and Sophie had left a new energy in the air, a promise of renewal that went beyond mere architectural renovation. For the first time since his grandmother's death, Michael felt that this place could become a home again, not just a museum of memories. And for the first time since discovering Sarah's letter, he allowed himself to imagine a future where repairing past injustices could lead to possibilities he had never considered. The sun was beginning to set outside the windows, painting the apartment in golden hues that made his grandmother's plants look even more lush. Michael smiled, wondering what Hope would say about the recent developments in his life. "I think you would approve of her, Grandma," he murmured to the jasmine-scented air, "and I'm sure you would approve of the changes I'm planning to make at the company as well." The apartment remained silent, but Michael had the distinct feeling that he had received a silent blessing to move forward with both projects, the renovation of the space and the reform of his own business consciousness. Monday arrived laden with dark clouds threatening rain over New York, creating that heavy atmosphere typical of autumn that seemed to herald change. Michael arrived at the office of Johnson & Sons with a determination he hadn't felt in weeks, carrying in his briefcase Sarah's letter and a list of questions that had kept him awake over the weekend. The meeting with Robert Johnson was scheduled for 10 a.m., but Michael arrived an hour early to review all the documents related to the layoffs due to restructuring over the past 2 years. What he discovered in his preliminary investigation made his stomach churn. Sitting at his executive desk, he spread the papers like pieces of a grim puzzle. Sarah had not been the only qualified employee dismissed without a real justification. In the past 18 months, at least 8 competent professionals had been fired for questioning dubious environmental practices or for refusing to participate in material-saving schemes that compromised the quality of the constructions. "Mrs. Smith, can you call Robert and ask him to bring all the HR files from the last 2 years?" Michael's voice sounded harsher than he intended, reflecting the growing frustration with the discoveries he was making about the company he thought he knew. Robert entered the office 15 minutes later, carrying 3 boxes of files and a worried expression. His 50s seemed to have aged a few more years in recent days, and his hands trembled slightly as he organized the documents on the table. "Good morning, Michael. I brought everything I could find about the layoffs from the last 2 years. His voice was cautious, as if he knew he was about to open a corporate Pandora's box. "Robert, have a seat." Michael gestured to the chair in front of the desk. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened with each of these people, and I want the complete truth, not edited versions to protect my father's memory." Robert swallowed hard and opened the first folder. "Where do you want me to start?" "With Sarah Thompson. I want to know exactly why an architect with excellent evaluations was fired." "Sarah." Robert sighed deeply. "She was truly one of our best professionals, creative, detail-oriented, always delivered projects on time, but she started questioning some decisions about materials in high-end residential projects." "What kind of questions?" "She discovered that we were using cheaper materials in areas that clients couldn't see: internal structures, thermal insulation, plumbing systems. We were saving about 15% on costs per unit, but she argued that this compromised the durability and energy efficiency of the buildings." Michael felt anger rising in his throat. "And my father was aware of this?" "Not only was he aware, but he was the one who implemented the policy. He said it was necessary to maintain our competitiveness in the market." Robert lowered his eyes. "Sarah started documenting the substitutions and threatened to take the case to the AIA if we didn't change the specifications. And then you fired her to silence her. Your father said she was becoming a problem for the operational efficiency of the company." Those were his exact words. Robert opened a folder and pulled out a printed email. It's all documented here. He gave me direct orders to find a legal justification for the dismissal. Michael read the email, feeling a growing nausea. His father's cold and calculating language, referring to Sarah as a problem, contrasted brutally with the caring and dedicated woman he had met over the weekend. And the other cases? Robert began narrating a sequence of injustices that painted a devastating picture of Robert Johnson's management. Carlos Henry, a civil engineer who questioned the use of concrete with lower resistance than specified, fired for insubordination. Anna Parker, a landscape architect who refused to sign projects that violated municipal environmental regulations, dismissed for not adapting to the corporate culture. "Robert," Michael interrupted after hearing the fifth similar case, "how could you sleep at night knowing you were part of this?" The older man lowered his head, his nervous hands fiddling with a pen. "I have a family to support, Michael. 2 kids in college, a mortgage. Your father made it very clear that anyone who questioned his decisions would follow the same path as the problematic employees. And now, with my management, are you still afraid to speak the truth?" "I don't know what kind of manager you will be," Robert admitted with brutal honesty. "I hope you are different from your father, but businessmen tend to change when they feel the pressure of the numbers." Michael stood up and walked to the window, observing the city traffic 45 floors below. Every person on the streets had dreams, responsibilities, fears, just like Sarah when she wrote that desperate letter that was never answered. "Robert, I want you to prepare a complete report on all these cases, including documentation of all the irregular practices that have been implemented in the last 2 years. And I want recommendations on how we can reverse the damage done." "Reverse?" Robert seemed surprised. "Michael, this is going to cost a lot of money. Some of these buildings have already been delivered to clients. If we admit we used inferior materials, then we will have to face the consequences." Michael turned to face Robert directly. "Would you rather we continue perpetuating dishonest practices until someone external discovers it and completely destroys the company's reputation?" At that moment, the intercom buzzed. Mrs. Smith's tense voice came through. "Michael, you have a visitor. A young woman named Sarah Thompson says she needs to speak with you urgently." Michael felt his blood run cold. Sarah was there, at the company, probably to deliver the project proposal. She had no idea she was entering the wolf's den that had destroyed her previous career. "Ask her to wait in the small conference room. And Robert, take all these documents to your office. We'll talk later." Robert quickly left with the boxes of files, leaving Michael alone to process the complex situation that had arisen. Sarah was just a few feet away, likely excited about the renovation project, unaware that he was the son of the man who had ignored her desperate plea. Michael adjusted his tie, locked Sarah's letter in the desk drawer, and took a deep breath before heading to the conference room. He found Sarah organizing architectural boards on the table, dressed in a white blouse and a navy pencil skirt that made her look even more professional and elegant. Sophie was not with her, indicating that she had probably left her daughter with someone to focus entirely on the presentation. "Good afternoon," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. "It's great to see you again." "Good afternoon. I hope I'm not interrupting. I know you must have a busy schedule, but I was so excited about the project that I ended up finishing the proposal ahead of time." Sarah radiated professional enthusiasm, her eyes sparkling as she pointed to the drawings spread across the table. Michael approached, trying to concentrate on the technical explanations while battling the weight of guilt growing in his chest. "Look at this," Sarah said, indicating a detailed floor plan. "I managed to create a perfect integration between modernity and historical preservation. The new kitchen will occupy this space here, but we kept the original layout of the living room to preserve the harmony of the piano with the library. Michael looked at the drawings with genuine admiration. Sarah had perfectly captured the essence of the grandmother's apartment while proposing smart, functional improvements. Every detail revealed not only technical competence, but also artistic sensitivity and a deep understanding of what the space emotionally represented. Sarah, this is extraordinary. You managed to read the soul of the apartment and translate it into practical solutions. Thank you, she replied, slightly blushing at the compliment. I spent Sunday night developing alternatives. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibilities. She leaned over the table to point out specific details of the project, and Michael caught that subtle jasmine scent he had. Noticed at the cafe, the physical closeness made his heart race, but it also intensified the guilt that was eating him inside. And look at this solution for the plumbing system, Sarah continued, showing a technical diagram. We can install a rainwater harvesting system that will reduce consumption by up to 40%. It's a higher initial investment, but the environmental and financial return is exceptional. Michael studied the diagram, impressed with the technical sophistication of the proposal. Do you always work with this level of detail? Always. I believe responsible architecture requires technical excellence. It's no use having good environmental intentions if the execution is poorly done. Sarah hesitated for a moment before continuing. I've worked in places where supervisors didn't value this kind of care. It was frustrating to see projects being simplified for purely financial reasons. The observation hit Michael like a punch in the stomach. Sarah was clearly referring to her experience at Johnson & Sons, although she didn't know she was speaking to the son of the man who had authorized her dismissal. It must have been very difficult to work in such an environment, Michael said carefully. It was, especially when you try to do what's right and find yourself being punished for it. Sarah looked out the conference room window, which offered a partial view of the city. But I learned that sometimes we need to go through bad experiences to appreciate the good opportunities that come afterward. Michael felt a lump in his throat. Sarah, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. How do you manage to maintain that positivity after, well, the difficulties you've faced as a single mother and professionally? Sarah studied him for a moment as if assessing whether she could trust him with an honest answer. Sophie, she finally said, when I look at her, I remember that I need to be an example of strength and integrity. I can't let injustices in the past contaminating the future I'm building for us. And have you completely overcome the anger of what happened? I'm not going to lie and say I've completely moved on. I still feel anger sometimes, especially when I think about how I was treated at that construction company. But I've learned that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Sarah smiled sadly. I prefer to channel that energy into building something better. Michael lowered his eyes, unable to maintain her direct gaze while knowing the truth she was unaware of. You are an extraordinary person, Sarah. Thank you, but I'm just a woman trying to do the best I can with the cards life has dealt me. At that moment, Mrs. Smith entered the room with a cup of coffee for each of them. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you might like some coffee. Thank you very much, Sarah said politely. Actually, may I ask how long you've worked at the company? More than 20 years. Dear, I met Michael when he was just a boy visiting his father on weekends. Michael tensed, fearing where the conversation might lead. Sarah looked at him in surprise. You grew up visiting this company? My father worked here, Michael replied evasively. How interesting. In what area? Mrs. Smith, unaware of the tension in the room, cheerfully replied. Michael's father was the owner of the company, dear. Robert Johnson, May he rest in peace. Michael just took over the presidency after his father's passing. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked from Mrs. Smith to Michael, her expressions quickly shifting from confusion to understanding and then to something that felt like betrayal. "You are Michael Johnson." Her voice came out as an incredulous whisper. "Sarah, I can explain. You are the son of Robert Johnson, the owner of Johnson & Sons Construction." It wasn't a question, but a statement loaded with growing pain. Mrs. Smith finally sensed the tension in the air and discreetly left the room, leaving Michael and Sarah alone with the truth that had just exploded between them. "Sarah, please let me explain. It's not what you think." Sarah stepped away from the table, her hands trembling slightly as she began to gather the drawings. "It's not what I'm thinking. And what exactly am I thinking, Michael Johnson?" The way she pronounced his full name sounded like an accusation. Michael felt panic rising in his chest, watching all the progress he had made with Sarah disintegrate before his eyes. "I'm thinking that the son of the man who destroyed my career approached me pretending to be an ordinary client. I'm thinking that all of this was an elaborate setup for what exactly? It wasn't a setup, Sarah. My interest in the project is genuine, and my admiration for you is real." "Admiration?" Sarah laughed bitterly as she put away the drawings. "What kind of admiration starts with lies and manipulation?" Michael stepped closer to her, desperate to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. "Sarah, I found your letter." She stopped packing the papers and looked him directly in the eye. "What letter?" "The letter you wrote to my father asking for a second chance. It was forgotten in a drawer of his office. That's how I knew who you were." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Her face paled, and she leaned on the table to steady herself. "You read my letter?" "I did. And I was devastated by what I discovered about how you were treated. Sarah, my father never responded to your letter. It was lost among old papers, as if it had never been read." Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before responding. "And you thought you could make up for your father's injustice by offering me a project, as if it were charity? It's not charity, it's justice. You were wrongfully terminated, and I want to correct that mistake." "Correct?" Sarah opened her eyes, and Michael saw tears of anger forming. "Do you think you can correct months of despair, of sleepless nights wondering how I would support my daughter, of having to accept poorly paid jobs because I need flexibility to care for Sophie?" "Sarah, please." "No!" She raised her voice for the first time, her composure finally breaking. "You have no idea what I've been through, what I'm still going through. And now I find out that all of this was, what? Guilt. Pity." Michael felt his own tears burning in his eyes. "It was admiration, Sarah. Admiration for your strength, for your integrity, for how you turned injustice into determination. Admiration based on lies." Sarah finished packing the drawings and headed for the door. "Thank you for reminding me that I can't trust anyone in this world." "Sarah, wait," Michael followed her. "We can talk about this. I can explain better." She turned at the door, and the pain in her eyes was like a dagger to Michael's heart. "There's nothing to explain, Michael. You lied from the very first moment. You pretended to be someone you're not to get close to me. This isn't admiration, it's manipulation." "And the project?" Sarah laughed humorlessly. "You can keep your guilt project. I will find clients who value me for who I am, not out of pity for what I've suffered." She left the room, leaving Michael alone with the shards of what could have been the beginning of something special. The silence of the conference room echoed with Sarah's harsh words and the weight of his own misguided decisions. Michael sat heavily in one of the chairs, putting his head in his hands. He had tried to do the right thing, but he had started with a lie, And lies, no matter how well-intentioned, always came at too high a price. Outside the window, New York continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the personal drama that had just unfolded on the 45th floor. Michael knew there was much work ahead to fix not only the injustices committed by the company, but also the trust he had just destroyed with the only person who mattered. Michael had managed to awaken feelings in him that he didn't even know existed. The rain finally began to fall, washing the streets of the city and creating a melancholic soundtrack for the painful reflections that Michael knew he could no longer postpone. The rain, which had started as a light drizzle, had transformed into a typical autumn downpour, creating curtains of water that obscured the view from the office windows. Michael remained alone in the conference room for almost an hour after Sarah left, trying to process the emotional devastation that had befallen him. The sound of his own footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he returned to his office, carrying the weight of guilt like a stone in his chest. Mrs. Smith watched him with concern as he passed her desk, but had the wisdom not to ask questions. Sitting again in his executive chair, Michael took Sarah's letter from the locked drawer and reread it for the 10th time. The words that once stirred admiration and determination in him now sounded like direct accusations against his character. I await your response with the hope of one who believes in the human kindness that still exists in the business world. The irony was cruel. Sarah had believed in human kindness and in return received silence, dismissal, and abandonment. Now, when she finally found someone willing to acknowledge her injustice, she discovered that this person had built the entire approach on a fundamental lie. The phone rang, interrupting his self-flagellating thoughts. It was Mrs. Smith. "Michael, your cousin Andrew is on the line. He says it's urgent." Andrew Johnson, 3 years older than Michael, was a lawyer specializing in corporate law and one of the few family members he truly trusted. He was also one of the few people who knew the true values that Grandmother Hope had tried to instill in her grandchildren. "Andrew, good to hear your voice." "Michael, I just received a very interesting call from a former employee of Johnson & Sons, a guy named Robert Johnson. He said you're investigating irregular practices at the company and might need legal advice." Michael sighed. Robert had acted quickly, probably fearing the legal consequences of his involvement in Robert Johnson's schemes. "It's true. I discovered some things about my father's management that, well, contradict everything our grandmother taught us about integrity in business. Can I come over? I think we need to talk about this in person." "Sure, come now. I have a lot to tell you." Andrew arrived 40 minutes later, shaking his umbrella at the entrance and bringing with him the smell of rain and the pragmatic energy that always characterized him. Tall and slender like Michael, but with darker hair and a well-groomed beard, Andrew had the appearance of the successful lawyer he was, yet maintained the humility and family values that had united them since childhood. "Man, you look terrible," Andrew observed as soon as he entered the office. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I really haven't," Michael admitted, gesturing for his cousin to sit down. "Andrew, I need to tell you everything I discovered, but first I need to ask you a question. What did you know about my father's business practices?" Andrew settled into the chair and remained silent for a few moments, carefully choosing his words. "Michael, I always had my suspicions. Uncle Robert changed a lot in recent years, especially after the 2015 crisis. He became more pragmatic, less concerned with ethical issues, and more focused on financial results." "And you never said anything?" "I tried a few times, indirectly. But you know how he was when making a decision. And honestly, I didn't have concrete evidence, just impressions." Michael told Andrew everything, from the discovery of Sarah's letter to Robert's revelations about the irregular practices, including the emotional disaster of the afternoon Andrew listened in silence, making occasional notes and frowning more and more as the narrative unfolded. "Michael, this is much more serious than I imagined," Andrew said when his cousin finished speaking. "We're talking about possible fraud against clients, violations of environmental regulations, illegal dismissals in retaliation. The list of potential legal problems is extensive. And from a moral standpoint, it's even worse," Michael added bitterly. "We've destroyed the professional lives of honest people to protect questionable profits. And this Sarah, you're in love with her, aren't you?" The direct question caught Michael off. "Igard, I don't know if it's love, but there's something about her that awakens feelings in me that I've never experienced. A connection that goes beyond physical attraction or professional admiration. And now she hates you. Rightfully so. I started everything with a lie, no matter how good my intentions were." Andrew stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain continue to fall over the city. "Michael, I'll be direct with you. From a legal standpoint, we can resolve the company's issues. It will be expensive, it will require significant structural changes, but it's possible. From a personal standpoint, well, that depends on your ability to prove that your intentions are genuine." "How can I prove that if she doesn't even want to talk to me?" "By doing what's right, regardless of whether she's watching or not. By correcting injustices not to impress her, but because it's the right thing to do." Michael returned home that night carrying the weight of decisions he knew would completely change the future of the company and his own life. The apartment in Chelsea, modern and minimalist, had never seemed so empty as it did on that rainy Tuesday night. He prepared a simple dinner, pasta with tomato sauce, the basic recipe he had learned to make when living alone during college. As he cooked, his mind kept returning to the expression of betrayal in Sarah's eyes when she discovered who he really was. The phone rang during dinner. To his surprise, it was Carla, Sarah's business partner. "Mr. Michael, my name is Carla Johnson. I'm Sarah's partner at the architecture firm. She told me what happened today." Michael felt the Gabriel's heart raced. "Carla, I can explain—" "You don't need to explain anything to me, Mr. Johnson. In fact, I'm calling because I'm worried about Sarah. She came here today emotionally shattered. I haven't seen her so shaken since she was fired from your company." "How is she now?" "Furious, hurt, and trying to convince herself that she feels nothing for you except anger." Carla paused. "But I've known her for years, Mr. Johnson. She wouldn't be so devastated if she hadn't developed real feelings for you." Gabriel closed his eyes, feeling a mix of hope and pain. "Carla, you need to know that my feelings for Sarah are genuine. I started everything off on the wrong foot, but what I feel for her is real. I believe you, and that's why I'm going to give you some advice. If you really care about her, prove it through actions, not words. Sarah has heard too many empty promises in her life." "What do you suggest?" "Correct the injustices your company has committed, not just with Sarah, but with everyone who has been harmed. And do it publicly, taking responsibility for past mistakes. If your intentions are genuine, this should matter to you regardless of whether you win Sarah back or not." After hanging up the phone, Gabriel spent the rest of the night on the computer, researching corporate compliance processes and corporate social responsibility programs. If he was going to completely reform Johnson & Sons, he needed a comprehensive and well-founded plan. The next morning, he arrived at the office determined to implement changes that would honor the memory of Grandmother Hope and perhaps begin to repair the damage he had caused to Sarah. The first call was to Andrew. "I want you to prepare a complete legal protocol to correct all the irregularities we've discovered. Cost is not an obstacle." The second was to Robert. "I want a list of all employees who were unjustly fired in the last 2 years, with current contact addresses." The third was to the finance department. "I want a complete audit of all ongoing projects. I want to know exactly where we are saving money at the expense of quality." Mrs. Smith watched all the activity with a mix of surprise and pride. During the lunch break, she approached Gabriel with a motherly smile. "You know, Gabriel, your grandmother would be very proud of the man you are becoming." "I hope so, Mrs. Smith. I have a lot of work to do, to make up for past mistakes. And that beautiful girl who was here yesterday, Sarah—" Gabriel sighed. "I made a terrible mistake with her, Mrs. Smith. I don't know if I can fix it. My son, a mistake that is acknowledged and attempted to be corrected is no longer a mistake. It's a lesson. And if she is the right woman for you, she will understand that eventually." During the afternoon, Gabriel began receiving the first information from the financial audit. The numbers were even worse than he had imagined. Savings from inferior materials had resulted in additional profits of nearly $3 million over the past 2 years, but had compromised the structural quality of at least 150 housing units. At 5 p.m., Andrew returned with the legal protocol. "Gabriel, this is going to hurt financially. We're talking about at least $8 million in compensations, renovations, and adjustments, not to mention possible regulatory fines." "And what if we do nothing? If someone discovers and makes it public, the company could go completely bankrupt. We're talking about a scandal that could permanently destroy the Johnson & Sons brand." Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Then let's do the right thing, prepare all the necessary documents." That night, alone in his apartment, Gabriel turned on the digital piano he had bought years ago, but rarely used. His hands found the keys of the lullaby he had played for Sophie at Grandmother Hope's apartment, and the soft melody filled the silence of the room. As he played, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where the company was known for its integrity, where Sarah could forgive him for the initial lie, where perhaps Sophie could grow up in a slightly fairer world thanks to the changes he was implementing. But even with all the determination to do what was right, Gabriel knew he had hurt Sarah deeply, and some wounds took time to heal, if they healed completely at all. The sound of rain against the apartment windows created a melancholic soundtrack for his reflections. Gabriel knew he was at the beginning of a long and difficult journey, both to reform the company and to try to regain the trust of the woman who, in just a few days, had awakened in him the desire to be a better person. But for the first time since discovering the letter, Gabriel felt he was finally on the right path, even if it was a lonely and uncertain one. Grandmother Hope always said that doing the right thing was rarely easy, but it was always worth it. As he continued to play in the dark of the apartment, Gabriel made a silent promise to the memory of his grandmother and to his own conscience. He would correct all the mistakes of the past, regardless of personal or financial cost. And if Sarah could never forgive him, at least he would know that his actions had been motivated by genuine love, not guilt or manipulation. The music echoed through the empty apartment, carrying with it hopes of redemption and the possibility of a future built on stronger foundations than those he had inherited. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation in the conference room, and Gabriel had thrown himself headfirst into the complete reform of Johnson & Sons. He arrived at the office at 7 in the morning and only left after 10 at night, working tirelessly with Andrew and a team of consultants specializing in corporate compliance to implement the necessary changes. Thursday morning brought news that Gabriel had been dreading. Mrs. Smith entered his office with a worried expression, carrying a copy of the New York Times and a cup of coffee that trembled slightly in her hands. "Michael, my son, I think you need to see this." The headline on the first page of the economics section made Michael's stomach drop. Johnson & Sons admit to irregularities in residential projects. Company offers voluntary compensation to clients. The article, written by investigative journalist Paula Roberts, meticulously detailed the irregular practices that Michael had decided to make public as part of his transparency protocol. The text specifically mentioned the use of inferior materials, retaliatory firings, and the compensation program the company had implemented. "How did she get such detailed information?" Michael murmured, quickly reading the article. "I don't know, but the phone hasn't stopped ringing since the paper hit the stands," Mrs. Smith said nervously. "Clients, suppliers, other media outlets, all wanting clarifications." Michael took a deep breath, knowing this moment would come sooner or later. He had opted for total transparency, even knowing it would bring difficult-to-manage consequences. "Mrs. Smith, schedule a press conference for this afternoon. I will personally explain all the measures we are taking to address the issues." At 3 p.m., the company's auditorium was packed with journalists, client representatives, and some curious employees. Michael stood behind the podium, wearing his best navy blue suit and a tie that his grandmother had gifted him years ago, a symbolic attempt to channel the strength and integrity she had always represented. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I have come to publicly take responsibility for business practices that do not align with the values that should guide our company." Michael spoke for 40 minutes, detailing each discovered irregularity, the corrective measures implemented, the compensation program for affected clients, and the structural changes in company policy. His voice remained steady, even when some journalists' questions were particularly aggressive. "Mr. Johnson," asked Paula Roberts, the journalist who had written the original piece, "you are taking responsibility for practices that were implemented by your father. Why did you decide to publicly expose problems that could have been resolved discreetly?" Michael looked directly at the journalist. "Because transparency is not just a pretty word for annual reports. It is a daily commitment to the truth, even when that truth is inconvenient. My grandmother taught me that integrity is non-negotiable, and that lesson is worth more than any financial consideration." During the Q&A session, a journalist from CNN asked, "Mr. Johnson, there are rumors that these changes were motivated by personal issues, not just business ones. How do you respond to that?" Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "The motivations for doing what is right should never be questioned, whether they are personal or professional. What matters is that injustices are being corrected." When the press conference ended, Michael felt exhausted but relieved. He had publicly exposed all the problems and committed to concrete solutions. Now it was time to await the consequences. Those consequences did not take long to arrive. On Friday, 3 major clients cancelled ongoing contracts, citing loss of trust in the brand. Some suppliers began to demand upfront payments instead of the usual terms. The company's stock value, although not publicly traded, plummeted in market assessments. But there were also positive reactions. Several industry professionals reached out, praising Michael's transparency. Some new clients, specifically interested in a construction company that took responsibility for its mistakes, requested quotes. Forbes requested an interview about the new model of responsible business management. It was on a Saturday afternoon, while Michael was alone in the office working on restructuring plans, that Mrs. Smith called with a nervous voice. "Michael, there's someone downstairs who wants to speak with you. She says it's urgent." "Who is it?" "Sarah Thompson." Michael felt his heart race. "Send her up, Mrs. Smith, and thank you for calling on a Saturday. I'm here organizing some documents, and Michael, she seems different, less angry." Michael quickly tidied his desk, ran his hand through his hair, and tried to control the anxiety growing in his chest. He had mentally rehearsed this conversation hundreds of times over the past 2 weeks, but now that the moment had arrived, he felt completely unprepared. Sarah entered the office wearing dark jeans and a white cotton blouse, her hair down over her shoulders. Her expression was serious, but she didn't carry the seething anger from the last time they had seen each other. Sophie was not with her. "Good afternoon," she said formally. "Sarah." Michael stood up, unsure whether to approach or keep his distance. "Thank you for coming. Where is Sophie?" "With my mother. I thought it best we talk alone." They stared at each other in silence for a few seconds, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them like a storm cloud. "I saw the report in the paper," Sarah finally said, "and I watched your interview on TV." "And what did you think?" Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the city view on a Saturday afternoon. "I was surprised. I didn't expect you to go so far." "Sarah, Let me speak first," she gently interrupted. "I spent 2 weeks furious with you. Furious about the lie, the manipulation, for making me feel stupid, for believing someone could genuinely care about me." Michael felt each word like a stab, but he remained silent. "But then I saw you on TV, taking responsibility for mistakes that weren't even yours, jeopardizing the company's financial future to do what is right." Sarah turned to face him. "And I realized that maybe I judged your motivations too hastily. Sarah, I need you to know that your feelings are genuine, that it wasn't pity or guilt." Sarah interrupted him again, but now with a half-smile. "Michael, if it were just guilt, you would have offered me money, and that would have been it. You wouldn't have destroyed your own company to correct injustices that no one even knew existed." Michael felt tears of relief burning in his eyes. "So you forgive me?" "I forgive the initial lie. It was an impossible situation, and maybe I would have done something similar." Sarah approached him. "But I need to know, what you feel for me is real, or am I just a personal redemption project?" Michael looked directly into her brown eyes, searching for the right words to express feelings he didn't fully understand himself. "Sarah, over the last 15 days, I've thought about you every day, not because I feel guilty about what my father did, but because you've awakened feelings in me that I never imagined existed. Your strength, your integrity, the way you love Sophie, how you turn adversity into determination." He paused, gathering courage. "I think I'm in love with you, and it's not out of pity, guilt, or any other reason that isn't genuine." Sarah studied his face for long seconds, as if searching for signs of deceit or manipulation. Finally, her eyes softened. "I felt something special between us too," she admitted softly. "That's why it hurt so much to discover the truth. The way I did, it wasn't just about the lie. It was about having to question whether the feelings I was developing were based on something real." Michael moved closer until they could feel each other's breath. "And now? What do you feel?" "That maybe we deserve a second chance, a chance to start over with complete transparency." Michael extended his hand, and Sarah accepted it without hesitation. The touch sent waves of warmth throughout his body. "Sarah Thompson, my name is Michael Johnson. I'm a businessman. I enjoy classical music and sustainable architecture, and I have a deep respect for courageous single mothers who fight for their principles." Sarah smiled for the first time since she had entered the office. "Nice to meet you, Michael Johnson. My name is Sarah. I'm an architect. I love projects that respect the environment, and I'm learning to trust again." They laughed together, the tension finally dissipating between them. "And what about the apartment project?" Michael asked. "Are you still interested in working with a stubborn architect who questions everything?" "Especially for that reason." Sarah smiled and moved closer. "Then I think we can discuss the details, but this time with total transparency about motivations and expectations." "Agreed. And Sarah?" "Yes?" "I would like to meet your mother, and if she doesn't mind, I'd like to take you both out for dinner tonight. I know an Italian restaurant in the gardens that has a kids' area where Sophie can play." Sarah studied him for a moment before responding. "All right, but with one condition." "What?" "No fancy cars or extravagant places. I want a simple date where we can talk without impressing anyone." Michael smiled. "I know the perfect place, a family pizzeria in the Villa Maddalena that makes the best margarita in the city. And they have high chairs for babies. Perfect." When Sarah left the office that afternoon, Michael felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. There was much work ahead to rebuild the company and prove that he deserved Sarah's trust. But for the first time in weeks, he felt he was on the right path, both professionally and personally. The city outside continued its fast pace, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in offices and apartments scattered throughout its neighborhoods. But for Michael, that Saturday afternoon marked the beginning of a new phase. One in which honesty and integrity were not just beautiful words, but principles that guided every important decision in his life. And for the first time since the death of Grandmother Hope, Michael felt that she would truly be proud of the man he was striving to become. The dinner at the pizzeria in Villa Maddalena exceeded all of Michael's expectations. The unpretentious atmosphere, rustic wooden tables, walls adorned with old neighborhood photos, and the unmistakable aroma of fresh dough in the oven created exactly the ambiance that Sarah had requested. Helena, Sarah's mother, turned out to be a 60-year-old woman with well-kept grey hair and brown eyes identical to her daughter's, but filled with a wisdom that came from decades of facing adversity with dignity. "So you're the famous Michael who turned my daughter upside down," Helena said with a playful smile as she cut a piece of margherita pizza for Sophie. "Mom!" Sarah protested, visibly blushing. Michael laughed, appreciating Helena's spontaneity. "I hope it's an upside down in a good way." "Well, considering she spent 2 weeks alternating between anger and sadness, I'd say yes. Sarah has always been like that. When something really affects her, she can't hide it." During dinner, Michael watched fascinated as the family dynamic unfolded among the 3 generations. Helena treated Sophie with the loving devotion of a grandmother who had recently reconciled with her daughter. Sarah perfectly balanced maternal attention with adult conversation, and Sophie charmed everyone with her babbling and toothless smiles. "Michael," Helena said when Sophie was distracted with a toy, "Sarah told me about the situation with your company. I admire your courage in taking responsibility for mistakes that weren't yours." Actually, they were mine, in a way. I inherited not only the company's assets, but also the consequences of past decisions. I can't take the profits and ignore the problems. Helena nodded approvingly. "My husband, God rest his soul, always said that character is measured not by what we do when it's easy, but by what we choose when it's hard." After dinner, they walked along Harmony Street until they reached the small park where Sarah often took Sophie to play. The April evening was mild, with that perfect temperature that made New York feel like a different, more humane and welcoming city. "Can I ask a personal question?" Michael said, as he pushed Sophie on the swing. "Sure," Sarah replied, sitting on the bench next to Helena. "How did you 2 reconcile? From what I understand, there was a difficult period when Sophie was born." Helena and Sarah exchanged glances, a silent communication that Michael was learning to recognize between mother and daughter. "I was wrong," Helena admitted without hesitation. "When Sarah told me about the pregnancy and that the father had abandoned her, my first reaction was not very maternal. I said things about how she had ruined her career and how difficult it would be to raise a child alone. Mum was scared. For me," Sarah gently interjected, "she fought hard to give me opportunities she never had herself." "But when Sophie was born," Helena continued, her eyes shining with emotion, "and I saw Sarah holding that little baby with so much love and determination, I realized I had underestimated my own daughter. She hadn't ruined anything. She had become an even stronger woman. Michael felt a tightness in his chest, imagining how difficult it must have been for Sarah to face not only the abandonment by Sophie's father, but also her own mother's initial disapproval. "And now we are a team," Sarah said, smiling at Helena. "Grandma Helena is Sophie's official babysitter on weekends, and Sarah's unofficial advisor on matters of the heart," Helena added with a playful wink. "Mom!" Sarah protested again, but she was laughing. At 9 p.m., Michael drove them back home. Sarah lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a building without a doorman in Brooklyn, just a 15-minute walk from the office where he worked. It was a neighborhood Michael knew little about, but it immediately charmed him, with its tree-lined streets, well-preserved old houses, and the bohemian atmosphere that mixed young professionals with middle-class families. "Thank you for dinner," Sarah said as Michael stopped in front of her building. "It was comforting." "For me too. Your mom is amazing. She liked you. She managed to go 15 minutes without criticizing any of your choices, which is almost a record." They laughed together, and Michael felt he had finally begun to break down the barriers Sarah had built around herself and her daughter. "Sarah, can I see you again? I mean, outside of project meetings?" Sarah studied his face in the soft streetlight. "Michael, I need to be honest with you about something." Michael's heart raced, fearing what would come next. "I'm not used to relationships. Since Sophie was born, my priority has been to build stability for the two of us. I don't know if I know how to date someone." Michael stepped closer to her, careful not to invade her personal space. "I don't know much about that either, to be honest. I've spent the last few years focused on my career and never found anyone who made me want to learn. And now? Now, I want to learn with you, in our own time, respecting your boundaries and Sophie's needs." Sarah smiled, and for the first time, Michael saw a vulnerability in her that she rarely allowed to show. "How about we start slow? Family outings, honest conversations, building trust." "Sounds perfect," Michael agreed. "And Sarah?" "Yes? Can I give you a goodnight kiss, a light one, just to seal our second first impression?" Sarah nodded, blushing slightly, and leaned in. The kiss was soft, chaste, but filled with promises and possibilities. When they pulled away, both were smiling. "Good night, Michael Johnson." "Good night, Sarah Thompson." During the following week, they established a routine that worked for both of them. Michael would stop by the pizzeria, where Sarah often had lunch with Sophie, sharing a table and discussing projects, literature, and future plans. On Thursdays, he would meet her at the park after work, helping to push Sophie on the swing while they talked about the challenges of the business renovation. The project for the grandmother's apartment became an excuse for longer meetings. They spent hours discussing every detail of the renovation, but the conversations inevitably drifted to more personal topics. Michael shared about his childhood raised by his grandmother, his insecurities about living up to the family legacy, and his dreams of creating a company known for its social responsibility. Sarah shared her professional ambitions, the challenges of balancing motherhood and career, and slowly, some of the wounds left by Sophie's father's abandonment. "You know what hurt me the most?" she confessed one Thursday afternoon as they watched Sophie try to climb a small playground. "It wasn't being abandoned. It was him saying that I had tried to trap him with the pregnancy, as if Sophie were a tool for manipulation, not a person." Michael felt anger rise in his throat. "He's an idiot who doesn't deserve either of you or the title of father. For a long time, I believed he might have been right, that maybe I should have been more careful, that maybe—" Sarah paused, struggling with old emotions. "Sarah." Michael gently touched her arm. "Sophie is the most beautiful thing that has happened in this world. Any man who can't see that doesn't deserve even 5 seconds of your attention." Tears formed in Sarah's eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I still hear his voice blaming me for everything." "Then I'll have to speak louder than that voice," Michael said determinedly, "every day, if necessary." It was at that moment that Michael realized he had completely fallen in love, not just with Sarah, but with the life they had built together. Sophie was not an obstacle to a relationship. She was an integral part of what made Sarah the extraordinary woman she was. At the company, the changes Michael had implemented were beginning to show positive results. 3 former employees who'd been unjustly fired accepted invitations to return, including Charles Henry, the engineer who had questioned concrete specifications. The trade press began to report on the ethical revolution at Johnson & Sons, and new clients sought the company specifically for its reputation for transparency. Andrew updated Michael weekly on the legal progress. The compensations to affected clients are being well received. No lawsuits have been filed, and some clients even publicly praised our proactive stance. And the numbers? We're going to close the quarter with a loss, as expected, but the projections for next year are optimistic. The brand is strengthening for the right reasons. Michael knew he had made the right choice, even if it came at a high financial cost. His grandmother it was said that investments in character always yielded returns, even if it took time. It was a Friday at the end of April, while they were reviewing the final details of the renovation project, that Sarah asked a question that caught Michael off guard. "Michael, can I ask you a very personal question?" "Of course." "What do you see in our future? I mean, in your future with Sophie and me?" Michael stopped examining the architectural plans and looked directly at her. It was a question he had been asking himself for weeks, but he didn't expect Sarah to verbalize it so directly. "I see a family," he said without hesitation. "Not a traditional family that starts with marriage and then children, but a family built on love, respect, and mutual commitment." "And Sophie? How do you see her in this equation?" Michael smiled, thinking of the little girl who had captured his heart just as completely as her mother. "I see Sophie as my heart daughter, if she accepts me. I don't want to replace her biological father. I want to be something different. I want to be the man who will be present for all the school performances, who will teach her to drive when the time comes, who will intimidate her boyfriends when she's a teenager." Sarah laughed through tears. "She already accepts you, Michael. Yesterday she asked when Gabby was going to have dinner with us again. And you? Do you accept me as part of your family?" Sarah moved closer to him, placing her hands on his chest. "I'm learning to accept, Michael. I'm learning that I don't have to do everything alone, that trusting isn't a sign of weakness." Michael covered her hands with his. "And I'm learning that loving doesn't mean possessing or controlling. It means being present, supporting, and respecting." They kissed again. But this time the kiss was deeper, filled with promises and the growing certainty that they were building something solid and lasting together. When they pulled away, Sarah whispered, "I think I'm ready to officially introduce you as my boyfriend to Sophie." Michael smiled, feeling his heart overflow with joy. "And I'm ready to be introduced." As they put away the project documents, Michael reflected on how much his life had changed in just a month. The discovery of Sarah's letter had been the catalyst not only for business renovations, but for a personal transformation that was leading him to become the man he had always had the potential to be. The city outside continued its fast pace, but inside that meeting room in Brooklyn, Michael and Sarah were building something that transcended the urban hustle. They were creating a space of love, trust, and infinite possibilities for the future. May brought with it the stability of established routines and the first major test for the relationship that Michael and Sarah had been carefully building. The renovation of Grandmother Hope's apartment was underway, and Michael had temporarily moved to a nearby hotel to closely monitor the work, which meant he was spending even more time with Sarah and Sophie. One rainy Monday morning changed everything. Michael was at the construction site of the apartment, supervising the installation of solar panels, when he received a call from Sarah with a visibly shaken voice. "Michael, I need to talk to you urgently. Can you come to my apartment?" "Of course, I'm on my way." "Did something happen to Sophie?" "No, she's fine. It's about her father. He showed up." Michael felt his blood run cold. During the weeks of their relationship, Sophie's father had been mentioned only briefly as a figure from the past that Sarah had managed to overcome. The idea that he could reappear had never crossed Michael's mind as a real possibility. The traffic between the Upper East Side and Brooklyn had never seemed so slow. Michael drove through the intermittent rain, his mind racing with possible scenarios and their implications. When he finally arrived at Sarah's building, he found her at the gate, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he had seen her in weeks. "Sarah, what happened exactly?" "Richard showed up at the door this morning. He said he wants to meet his daughter and take on his parental responsibilities." Sarah made air quotes with evident bitter sarcasm. They went up to the apartment, where Sophie was playing quietly on the living room rug, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing around her. Michael greeted her affectionately, but his attention was entirely focused on Sarah. Did he say anything else? Sarah sat on the sofa, running her hands through her hair in a gesture of anxiety that Michael was learning to recognize. "He said he heard through mutual acquaintances that I'm doing well now, and that he wants to be part of Sophie's life. He talked about parental rights, child support. Michael, he never wanted to know about Sophie. He never paid a dime, never asked if she was sick or needed anything." Michael felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to keep his voice calm. "And what did you say to him?" "I told him he lost any moral right when he abandoned me pregnant, but he threatened to go to court if I don't allow him to see Sophie." Michael knelt down next to Sarah, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, look at me. You're not alone in this." "But I am, Michael. He is her biological father. As much of a coward as he is, he has legal rights. And her voice broke, "I don't have the money for a long legal battle." "But I do." The response came out more firmly than Michael intended. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Michael, I can't accept." "It's not about accepting or not accepting. It's about protecting Sophie and protecting you." Michael stood up and began to pace the room, his mind already formulating strategies. "I'm going to call Andrew right now. He will guide us on the legal aspects." "Guide us?" Sarah repeated, focusing on the specific word. Michael stopped pacing and turned to her. "Sarah, if you allow me. I want to stand by your side in this fight, not as someone trying to solve your problems, but as family." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Michael, this could get very ugly, very complicated. Are you sure you want to get involved?" Michael looked at Sophie, who at that moment managed to stand up on her own and took a few wobbly steps in his direction, her little arms outstretched, asking to be picked up. He lifted her into his arms, feeling the small and confident weight of the child who had become so important in his life. "Sarah, this child calls me Gabby, smiles when she sees me arrive, and sleeps on my chest when we watch movies together. For all intents and purposes, she is already my daughter, and no one is going to intimidate my family." Sarah began to cry, not tears of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. Michael sat down next to her with Sophie in his lap, and she snuggled against him, creating a family embrace that felt natural and necessary. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for not running away." "Where would I run to?" Michael kissed the top of her head. "My heart is here." Andrew arrived 2 hours later, carrying a folder of legal documents and a serious expression that Michael knew well. It was his cousin's professional face when dealing with complicated cases. "Michael told me about the situation over the phone," Andrew said after politely greeting Sarah. "I need to understand some details to assess the legal situation." For the next hour, Andrew asked direct but sensitive questions about Sarah's relationship with Richard, the circumstances of the pregnancy and abandonment, and the complete absence of the father in Sophie's life during her first 15 months. "Sarah, legally speaking, Richard has basic paternal rights," Andrew explained with brutal honesty. "But the prolonged abandonment and lack of financial support work in favor of the mother. We can argue that supervised visits are the most he should be able to get, at least initially." "And what if he really takes this to court?" Sarah asked, her voice betraying fear. "Then we will be prepared. I will document everything, the abandonment, the lack of financial support, his attempts to reappear only when he learned of your financial stability." Andrew looked directly at her. "Sarah, you have an advantage. You have been an exemplary single mother. That carries a lot of weight in court." "And what about Michael? Could his involvement complicate things?" Andrew smiled slightly. "Actually, it could help. A stable relationship with a present father figure shows that Sophie is in a healthy family environment." After Andrew left, Michael and Sarah sat in silence for a few moments, processing all the legal information. Sophie had fallen asleep in Michael's arms, and he carefully carried her to the crib in the bedroom. When he returned to the living room, he found Sarah looking out the window, watching the rain that had started to fall again. "Michael, can I ask you a difficult question?" "Always." "If this drags on for months, if Richard manages to get some sort of joint custody, if our lives become complicated in ways we can't even imagine, will you still want to stay?" Michael approached her and hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Sarah, when I was a child and had nightmares, my grandmother used to tell me that the strongest storms are the ones that make the roots of trees grow deep. She said that true relationships are not tested by easy moments, but by how we face difficulties together." Sarah turned in his arms to look at him. "And what would your grandmother say about this storm?" Michael smiled, feeling the spiritual presence of Grandmother Hope almost tangible in the air. "She would say that it's worth fighting for any love that makes us better people, and you two make me a much better person." Sarah then kissed him, a deep kiss filled with gratitude, love, and the silent promise that they would face whatever the future brought together. That night, Michael stayed for dinner, something that had become routine, but this time carried a different meaning. It was not just a boyfriend visiting his girlfriend, it was a family coming together in the face of adversity. After Sophie went to sleep, Michael and Sarah sat on the small sofa in the living room, planning practical strategies to deal with Richard. "I'm going to hire a private investigator to document his habits," Michael said, making notes in a pad. "If he is really only interested in money or causing trouble, we need evidence." "Michael, that's going to be expensive." "Sarah." Michael stopped writing and looked directly at her. "I need you to understand one thing. I am not spending money on my girlfriend's problems. I am investing in the protection of my family. There is a fundamental difference." Sarah swallowed hard, touched by how Michael always managed to make her feel valued and protected without diminishing her. "But what if I can never repay you?" "Sarah," Michael gently interrupted her, "you have already given me more than any money could buy. You have given me purpose, true love, and a reason to want, to be a better man every day." They talked late into the night about legal strategies, but also about future dreams. Michael spoke about his desire to officially adopt Sophie when the situation stabilized. Sarah shared her plans to expand her architecture firm and maybe one day have more children, a conversation that made Michael's heart race with possibilities. "Michael," Sarah said when it was already past midnight, "can I ask you for one thing? Anything. If at any point this gets too heavy, if you need time to process or reconsider, promise me you'll be honest with me. I won't. Be hurt if you need space." Michael took Sarah's face in his hands, looking deeply into her brown eyes. "Sarah Thompson, listen carefully to what I'm going to say. There is nothing in this world that can pull me away from you and Sophie. Not problematic ex-girlfriends, not legal complications, not family or professional pressures. You two are my choice, every day, forever." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "I love you, Michael Johnson." It was the first time she had said those words, and they echoed through the small room like a promise of eternity. "I love you too, Sarah. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They kissed on the sofa, under the soft light of the lamp, while the rain continued to patter against the windows. It wasn't the romantic setting of Hollywood movies, but it was real, honest, and perfect for them. When Michael finally left that night, he took with him the certainty that he had found not only the woman of his life, but also his true calling, to be a father, protector, and companion to two people who had completely transformed. His understanding of what truly mattered in life. The storm that Richard would bring would be just another test they would face together, and Michael was sure they would come out of it even more united and strengthened. The autumn of June in New York arrived with chilly mornings and sunny afternoons, creating that thermal contrast that Sarah always associated with important changes in her life. 3 weeks had passed since Richard's reappearance, and the legal tension was reaching its peak. Andrew had managed to delay any court decision through technical maneuvers, but everyone knew that the final confrontation was inevitable. Michael was in his grandmother Hope's renovated apartment, overseeing the final details of the work, when he received the call he had been dreading. "Michael," he filed an official request for visitation rights. Andrew's voice sounded tense over the phone. "The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday. How are we doing in terms of documentation?" "We have everything we needed. The detective's report is devastating. Richard has a history of unstable relationships, chronic financial problems, and there is evidence that he only sought Sarah after discovering through social media about your relationship with her." Michael looked out the window of the renovated apartment, watching the trees in Central Park begin to lose their leaves. In a few weeks, that space would be ready to welcome new life, just as his own life was being rebuilt on more solid foundations. "And Sarah? How is she coping with the situation?" "Nervous, but determined. She's a fighter, Michael. She'll do well in the testimony." That afternoon, Michael went to meet Sarah and Sophie at the park where they used to gather. The scene he found made his heart contract. Sarah was sitting on the bench, watching Sophie play in the sand, but her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through legal documents. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders. "How are my girls?" Michael approached from behind, lightly kissing the top of Sarah's head. "Trying not to think about the hearing on Thursday," Sarah replied, leaning against him, "and failing miserably at it." Sophie, seeing Michael, dropped her toys and ran towards him with her arms outstretched, shouting, "Gabby! Gabby!" with pure joy. Michael picked her up, spinning her in the air until she laughed loudly, her crystal-clear sound echoing through the park. "And how is our little princess?" he asked, giving gentle tickles to Sophie's belly, which elicited more laughter. "She doesn't understand what's happening, thank God," Sarah said, watching the interaction with a mix of love and melancholy. Sometimes I envy that innocence. Michael sat down next to Sarah, holding Sophie in his lap. The 16-month-old girl had visibly grown in recent weeks, and her personality blossomed more each day. She was curious, affectionate, and clearly saw Michael as a father figure, something that made the whole situation with Richard even more painful. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Michael said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "If you're about to tell me that you're reconsidering this whole mess, Michael Johnson, I swear that—" "It's not that," Michael interrupted her with a reassuring smile. "It's about your grandmother's apartment. It's ready." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Already? But you said it wouldn't be ready until the end of the month." "The team worked double shifts. I want to show you both tomorrow if you're up for it." "Of course we are!" Sarah seemed genuinely excited for the first time in weeks. "Sophie loves seeing the construction. I think she's going to be an engineer when she grows up. Or an architect like her mommy," Michael suggested, making Sophie clap her hands as if she understood the conversation. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, but Michael noticed that Sarah was distracted, her mind clearly processing the possible scenarios for the hearing. When Sophie fell asleep in the stroller, he decided to address the topic he knew was consuming her thoughts. "Sarah, what do you fear most regarding the hearing?" She sighed deeply before answering. "That the judge looks at me and sees just a single mother trying to keep a father from his legal rights. That he doesn't understand that Richard isn't interested in Sophie as a person, but in causing trouble or gaining some kind of advantage. And if he gets supervised visitation, I'm afraid of how that will affect Sophie. She has a routine, Michael. She's used to people who love her unconditionally. How do I explain to a 1.5-year-old that this strange man has rights over her?" Michael took Sarah's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then let's make sure that doesn't happen." "How?" Michael hesitated for a moment, knowing that what he was about to propose would be controversial. Andrew found some information about Richard that might be useful. What kind of information? He owes money to several people, including some not-so-friendly creditors. There are rumors that he's involved in some questionable financial activities. Sarah frowned. "Michael, you're not suggesting that—" "I'm not suggesting anything illegal," Michael clarified quickly. "But if Richard is only interested in money, maybe we can reach an agreement that is better for everyone." "That? What kind of deal?" Michael took a deep breath, knowing he was entering delicate territory. A one-time cash payment in exchange for him permanently relinquishing parental rights. Sarah moved slightly away from him. "Michael, that sounds like bribery." "It's a legal agreement, Sarah. It happens more often than you think. Parents who have never been present agree to give up their rights in exchange for financial compensation to settle debts." Sarah fell silent for several minutes, clearly struggling with the ethical implications of the proposal. "How much are you thinking of offering?" "Enough to resolve his financial issues and make it worthwhile for him to disappear permanently from our lives." "Our lives," Sarah repeated, focusing on the possessive expression. Michael realized what he had said. "Sarah, I'm sorry if I seem to be assuming—" "No," she gently interrupted him. "I like how that sounds. Our lives, our family." They were interrupted by Sophie waking up hungry. Sarah fed her right there in the park, a scene of natural motherhood that Michael never tired of watching. The way Sarah spoke softly to their daughter, how she instinctively adjusted her position for greater comfort, how she smiled every time Sophie made a new sound. All of it reinforced his conviction that he would do anything to protect that family. That night, Andrew joined them at Sarah's apartment to discuss the final strategy. He brought with him a formal proposal he had drafted for Richard. "It's a generous offer," Andrew explained, flipping through the documents. $50,000, paid immediately upon signing documents permanently relinquishing any parental rights over Sophie. Will he accept? Sarah asked. If the information we've gathered is correct, he urgently needs that amount. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that he might refuse. Michael watched Sarah process all the information. He could see the internal conflict she was facing, between the desire to protect Sophie and the ethical scruples about buying the absence of her biological father. Sarah, Andrew said gently, I know this situation isn't ideal, but sometimes protecting a child requires pragmatic decisions, not just idealistic ones. What if he takes the money and then changes his mind? The documents are irrevocable. Once signed, he permanently loses any legal rights over Sophie, including the possibility of contesting a future adoption. The word adoption hung in the air like an unspoken promise. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, both understanding the future implications of the decision they were about to make. Michael, Sarah finally said, are you sure you want to invest that much money in this? Sarah, I won't keep repeating this forever, but I need you to understand. I'm not spending money on your problems. I'm investing in our future, in Sophie's future, in the future of the family we want to build together. Sarah nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. Then make the proposal. Andrew stepped out to contact Richard's lawyer, leaving Michael and Sarah alone to await the response. They sat on the couch, watching Sophie play with colourful blocks on the rug, building towers that she would delightfully knock down with laughter. Michael, can I ask you something? Always. If he accepts the proposal, if we can resolve this, when are you going to ask to adopt Sophie? The direct question left Michael momentarily speechless. Sarah had verbalized something he had been thinking for weeks, but he wasn't sure if she was ready to discuss it. When you're ready, he replied carefully. When you're sure that's what you want. Sarah smiled, an expression Michael hadn't seen in weeks, relaxed, genuine, full of hope. I think I already know the answer, but maybe we should wait to resolve this situation first. Michael agreed, but inside he felt a growing joy. The idea of officially adopting Sophie, of being legally recognized as the father of the girl he already loved as his own, made his heart race with anticipation. The phone rang around 10 p.m. It was Andrew. Michael, he accepted. He wants to meet tomorrow to sign the documents. Michael closed his eyes in deep relief. Really? Really? Apparently he was truly desperate for money. He didn't even want to negotiate. Michael looked at Sarah, who was watching his anxious expression. He gave a thumbs up, and he saw all the tension leave her body at once. Andrew, thank you so much for everything. Family is family, cousin. See you tomorrow to finalize everything. When Michael hung up the phone, Sarah threw herself into his arms, starting to cry with relief. It's over, she whispered against his shoulder. It's really over. Michael held her tightly, feeling his own emotions threatening to overflow. It's over, my love, and now we can focus on what really matters. Which is? Michael looked at Sophie, who had stopped playing and was watching them with curiosity, as if sensing the change in energy in the room. Building our family, officially and forever. That night after Sophie went to sleep, Michael stayed up late talking with Sarah about the future. They talked about adoption, about wedding plans, about the possibility of having more children, about how they wanted to raise Sophie with solid values and lots of love. Michael, Sarah said when it was past midnight, thank you for fighting for us, for not giving up when things got complicated. Sarah, Michael replied, gently kissing her forehead, thank you for letting me fight for you, for giving me a chance to be a father, a husband, and part of something bigger than myself. As Michael drove back to the hotel that night, He reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a forgotten letter in a drawer. In just a few months, his life had changed completely, not just his business practices, but his entire understanding of purpose, love, and family. The city outside slept under a typical winter fog, but Michael felt an inner warmth that no cold could touch. Tomorrow would be the last day of a battle that had begun long before he met Sarah, a battle between the man. December arrived in New York with that characteristic humid heat of the summer, bringing with it the renewing energy of the end of the year and the promise of new beginnings. Michael observed from the window of his grandmother Hope's renovated apartment, now completely livable and full of life, as he organized the final details for the company Christmas party he had decided to host right there at home. 6 months had passed since the signing of the documents that definitively ended Robert's involvement in Sophie's life. 6 months of carefully building a new family dynamic, of growing the company under new ethical values, and of deepening a love that had proven to be more solid with each challenge faced. Gabby! Gabby! Sophie, now almost 2 years old, ran through the apartment chasing Max, the golden retriever that Michael had adopted the previous month. The little girl had visibly grown, not just in size but in personality. She was talkative, curious, and displayed a precocious intelligence that charmed everyone who met her. "Slow down, princess, or you'll trip," Michael said, picking her up when she dashed through the living room. Sophie hugged him tightly, her brown hair now longer, tied in pigtails, that Sarah liked to decorate with colorful bows. "Dad, Mum is doing something secret in the kitchen," Sophie said, with the seriousness of someone sharing confidential information. Michael smiled upon hearing the word "Dad," which Sophie had started using naturally 3 months ago, after the adoption papers were finalized. The legal process had been surprisingly simple, considering that Robert had renounced all paternal rights. "Oh, really? And you didn't go spying, did you?" "No!" Sophie protested with childlike indignation, but her bright little eyes betrayed that she had tried. Sarah appeared at the entrance of the living room wearing an apron over a red dress that Michael had gifted her the week before. At 29, she radiated a confidence and joy that starkly contrasted with the defensive and cautious woman he had met 8 months ago. "Someone here was trying to steal brownies from the tray," she said, looking directly at Sophie with feigned severity. "It wasn't me," Sophie replied, hiding her face in Michael's shoulder. "Oh, wasn't it? Then who left tiny chocolate footprints in the kitchen?" Michael laughed, watching the interaction between mother and daughter with the affection that never faded. In recent months, he had become an expert at mediating these everyday family negotiations, discovering that parenthood was a mix of unconditional love, infinite patience, and a lot of humor. "Well," Michael said diplomatically, "I think someone can help Mom finish the treats for the party instead of eating them beforehand." "I'll help." Sophie immediately perked up, always excited about any activity that involved participating in the adult world. The Christmas party of Johnson & Sons had transformed into something quite different from the corporate celebrations of previous years. Instead of a formal event in a luxury hotel, Michael had decided to host employees, clients, and partners at home, creating a more family-oriented and welcoming atmosphere. The company had radically transformed under his management. The environmental responsibility program implemented by Sarah, who now led the sustainability department, had become a benchmark in the industry. The construction company was frequently cited in specialized magazines as an example of how ethical practices could be profitable in the long run. "Michael," Sarah approached him while Sophie played with Max on the rug. "Mrs. Smith just called. She said everyone confirmed attendance for tonight, even the people who were laid off and came back." "Great. And how are you feeling about the announcement?" Sarah smiled, instinctively placing her hand on her still flat belly. "Nervous. Excited. with a bit of morning sickness that I hope passes soon." Michael moved closer and kissed her gently. The news of the pregnancy had come 2 weeks ago, confirming suspicions they had both been having for some time. This time, however, the pregnancy was planned, desired, and happening within a context of emotional and financial stability that made everything calmer. "And Sophie, how do you think she will react when we tell her?" "I think she will be excited. She keeps asking for a little brother since she saw the neighbor's baby." The guests began to arrive at 7 p.m. The apartment, with its harmonious mix of preserved historical elements and sustainable modernizations, created a welcoming environment that impressed all visitors. Grandmother Hope's plants, now cared for by Sarah with the same affection, had grown lush, creating true indoor gardens that purified the air and filled the space with life. Mrs. Smith was one of the first to arrive, accompanied by her husband and bringing a chocolate cake that Sophie had specifically requested. At 62, Mrs. Smith had become not only an executive secretary, but a kind of adoptive grandmother to Sophie, who affectionately called her Grandma Carr. "My God, this place is getting more beautiful every day," Mrs. Smith commented, observing the Christmas decorations that Sarah had spread throughout the apartment. Natural wreaths, scented candles, and small Christmas trees made from recycled materials. "Sarah has magic hands," Michael replied with genuine pride. "She managed to keep my grandmother's spirit while adding her own personality." Andrew arrived shortly after, accompanied by his girlfriend Sarah, a labor lawyer who had become a close friend of Sarah's. The couple had met through Michael and Sarah, and now they often went on double dates on weekends. "Cousin," Andrew said, warmly hugging Michael, "you look like you have news to share." "Maybe," Michael replied with a mysterious smile. The party gradually grew, filling the apartment with lively conversations, laughter, and the delicious aroma of the dishes that Sarah had prepared with the help of a catering service. Michael watched everything with deep satisfaction, seeing employees of different hierarchical levels chatting naturally. As clients praised sustainable projects, Sophie moved among the guests like a little hostess, distributing smiles and winning hearts. Around 9 p.m., when everyone had served themselves and were relaxing, Michael requested attention to make a few announcements. "Everyone," he said, lightly tapping a champagne glass, "thank you all for being here today. This year has been transformative for Johnson & Sons, and I wanted to share some important things." The apartment fell into respectful silence, everyone turning their attention to Michael. "First, our final numbers for the year. We grew 35% in revenue, but more importantly, we reduced our environmental impact by 60%, and our company has been certified as one of the most ethical in the construction industry in New York." Warm applause echoed through the apartment. Michael saw tears of pride in Mrs. Smith's eyes and satisfied smiles on the faces of employees who had embraced the changes implemented. "Second," Michael continued, "I want to officially announce that Sarah Thompson, who many of you already know as our Sustainability Director, will be promoted to Vice President of Operations starting in January." More applause, this time accompanied by approving whistles. Sarah visibly blushed but accepted the congratulations with the elegance that had always characterized her. "And third," Michael paused, looking directly at Sarah, who was holding Sophie in her arms. "Sarah, and I want to share that our family is going to grow. We are expecting a baby in July next year." The apartment erupted in exclamations of joy and enthusiastic applause. Sophie, noticing she was the center of attention for a reason she didn't fully understand, began to clap as well, eliciting laughter from everyone. Mrs. Smith was the first to embrace the couple, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Grandmother Hope would be so proud," she whispered in Michael's ear. "You have turned this place into a true home of love." Andrew approached next, embracing his cousin with genuine emotion. Michael, seeing you now, it's hard to believe that a year ago you were just a successful businessman. Now you are complete. It's the power of true love, Michael replied, watching Sarah being congratulated by the other guests. And finding your true purpose. As the night progressed, Michael found himself on the apartment balcony, gazing at the city lights. The activity on United States Avenue had slowed, but New York never fully slept, always pulsating with the energy of millions of dreams and stories unfolding simultaneously. Sarah joined him on the balcony, leaning against the railing beside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How life can change completely when you least expect it. A year ago, I was a lonely man, inheriting a troubled company. Today you are the father of a 2-year-old girl who adores you, the husband of a woman who loves you infinitely, and the president of a company that is an example of business ethics." Michael smiled, wrapping his arm around Sarah's waist. "And in July, I will be the father of another child that I hope to love as much as I love Sophie." "You will love," Sarah said, "with absolute certainty, because you have the most generous heart I have ever known." They stood in silence for a few moments, listening to the distant sounds of the party inside the apartment and gazing at the stars that managed to shine through the city's light pollution. "Michael," Sarah finally said, "can I tell you a secret?" "Always. Sometimes I still reread that letter I wrote to your father, and I am amazed at how my life has completely changed since then." Michael pulled her closer, gently kissing the top of her head. "That letter was the best thing that ever happened to me. It showed me there was an extraordinary woman facing injustices with dignity and courage. And it brought me the love of my life," Sarah added, turning to face him. They kissed on the balcony, under the city lights and the silent blessings of Grandmother Hope, whose values of integrity and love had found new expression in the family that Michael and Sarah were building together. When they returned inside, they found Sophie asleep on the sofa, covered with a coat gently placed by some attentive guest. Max was sleeping on the floor beside her, creating a scene of domestic tenderness that made Michael's heart overflow with gratitude. "Our family," Sarah whispered, watching their daughter sleep. "Our family," Michael agreed, knowing it would soon be even bigger. The last guests said their goodbyes around midnight, leaving the apartment in silence filled with happy memories. Michael and Sarah carefully carried Sophie to her room, where they placed her in her crib without waking her. "I think she will love being a big sister," Sarah commented, adjusting Sophie's blanket. "And she will be an amazing big sister. Just look at how she already takes care of Max." As they prepared for bed, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a letter forgotten in a drawer. That discovery had triggered changes that transformed not only his company and ethical awareness, but his entire understanding of what true success meant. Success was not just about building buildings or accumulating profits. It was about building a family based on love and mutual respect. It was about leading a company that positively contributes to society. It was about waking up each morning knowing that your actions were making the world a little better for future generations. "Michael," Sarah said, "already." Lying beside him in the bed they now officially shared, "Thank you for teaching me that it's possible to trust again. Thank you for teaching me that true love is worth any risk," Michael replied, kissing her gently. As he fell asleep that Christmas night, Michael felt the comforting presence of Grandmother Hope seeming to bless the family that had grown in his old home. The plants she had lovingly nurtured continued to purify the air, just as the values she had instilled in Michael continued to purify his choices and decisions. Outside, New York continued its relentless rhythm, but inside that apartment in the Upper East Side, a family slept in peace. Peaceful, secure in the knowledge that he had built something solid and lasting on the foundations of true love, moral integrity, and the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Sarah's letter, which had started as a desperate plea for help, had transformed into a catalyst for a love story that changed not only two lives, but created positive ripples that spread throughout an entire company and the communities it served. And as 2024 approached its end, Michael knew that the best chapters of his story were yet to come, written with ink of hope, love, and the unwavering conviction that any dream is worth pursuing when built on true foundations.